Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Pierre Hotel Affair, How 8 Gentlemen Thieves Orchestrated the Largest Jewel Heist in History, by Daniel Simone, with Nick Sacco, narrated by Joe Barrett. This is dedicated in part to Frank and Antoinette, who have been in my heart throughout the arduous effort of producing this book. You know who you are. My soulmate, BJ, also deserves a dedication for her unconditional support, as does my dearest son, Daniel Simone. To my mother, stepfather, and grandmother, I only passed this way one time, and if I am to be remembered, I must leave my mark upon this earth. Nick Sacco. Cast of Characters. Bobby Comfort. He was charming, well-spoken, and polite, and had the appearance and demeanor of a white-collar professional, perhaps an accountant, or a lawyer, or a doctor, or a Wall Street type. And as a jewel thief, when the need arose, he'd comfortably assume those roles. He was fair-minded, even-handed, intelligent, and sensible, though he had been a juvenile delinquent and a burglar since his pre-adolescent years. Bobby Comfort was crafty, and irrespective of the dangers or difficulties he faced, his temperament and coolness seldom faltered, and never resorted to violence. He strived to gain financial security for his dear wife and children, and above all, that was his priority. Millie Comfort. She was Bobby's unconditionally devoted wife, though her husband's unconventional ways to earn a living caused her stress and despair. Millie was the ideal loving wife, mother, and homemaker. But how could she continue to live with the constant fear that the authorities might one day knock on her door and arrest Bobby for a burglary, or who knew what? This wasn't fair to her and their child. To what extent should she suffer while mired in her steadfast loyalty to him? Nick, the cat, Sacco. He is the co-author of this book. In his childhood, his father abandoned the family, leaving a cold void in the household. And seeing his mom grovel to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table, little Nick felt a compunction to lighten her burdens. That prompted him to delve into thieveries at the age of 9, and in no time he became proficient at it, though, like Bobby Comfort, he was dedicated to averting violence. Dodging the authorities, he stole here and robbed there, until he accumulated enough cash to relocate his mother to a respectable home. Sacco grew into adulthood, and because of his wit and physical limberness was known as the Cat. But what also grew was his penchant for a fast-track life of womanizing and luxuries, and gambling. Sammy, the Arab, Nalo. Nalo's trademarks were his long, bushy sideburns and the dense, curly wigs he wore during a robbery, and when he would court women, who were mainly topless dancers and part-time prostitutes. He was a genius at planning armed robberies, and applied his meticulousness to carry out those bold ventures. His wardrobe was fashionable and of high quality. Nalo was always bedecked in jewelry and exotic watches, as though a formal soiree awaited him, but he was apathetic and antisocial, save for his lady friends. Perhaps his mind was too preoccupied by his insurmountable gambling debts. Christie, the Tick, Fernari. He held the distinction as the Lucchese family consigliere, a coveted rank in the mafia organization. Typically, this position was reserved for astute, steady-tempered members who were not prone to reacting on impulse and reaching premature, unmeasured decisions. And Fernari fit that mold in an exemplary fashion. He also had a keen intuition to foresee undetectable developments with potential liabilities for him and the family. A true statesman. Al Visconti. He, too, held the distinction, though not as prestigious as Fernari's. Al Visconti was known to be gay, the reason the Lucchese bosses did not elevate him to a made man, despite his ingenious means as an earner. He had an uncanny resemblance to Rocky Marciano, and coincidentally, Visconti had a brief stint as a professional heavyweight boxer. His bid as a ranked contender, though, was lackluster, and he wisely retired his boxing gloves, thus resuming his criminal career. Bobby Germain. He was a cordial, smooth-talking burglar and veteran stick-up artist who treated his victims with the utmost care and civility. But another form of art was Germain's foremost desire. his ambition to become a crime writer, preferably an author who would chronicle his own litany of felonies. Al Green. This chap, an African-American, was a numbers runner who operated in the Harlem section of New York City. Green would roam about, flanked by a bevy of sisters, dabbling as a pimp. Characteristic of big-time black bookies, as a diversion he owned a raunchy bar, the Black Pussycat, where streetwalkers, lowly drug dealers, social welfare fraudsters, drunkards, and numbers runners lounged, frittering away time after a day of hard work. Ali Ben. He was a native of Turkey, ingrained with the archaic, close-minded mentality of a desert nomad. Ali Ben tended toward viciousness and bore no respect for human life. The well-being of a goat or a camel meant more to him than that of a person. But when he partook in heists sanctioned by Christy Fernari and his gunmen, he knew that weapons were just for show, and violence was off-limits. Donald, the Greek, Frankos. His primary occupation was defined as freelance contract killing. Frankos was associated with Mad Dog Sullivan, the head of the Westies, a murderous gang founded by Irish immigrants. The Greek also killed for Genovese underboss Fat Tony Salerno. However, on the few occasions when he collaborated with Nick Sacco in performing jewel heists, Frankos left his cold-blooded contract killer hat behind and switched to a non-aggressive posture. Joanne Rinaldi. The woman's beauty and promiscuity were the qualities with which she bartered for anything that fancied her. Adventure and men of power who tapped dance in minefields inebriated and electrified her. Unlike Millie Comfort, Joanne would not have been content to be a homemaker. She loved men, the masculine types, and would rather have fun than to have a baby. Indeed, the Manhattan nightlife inspired her, and she lived for it. Detective George Bermudez. He personified the NYPD's police officers of the 60s and 70s, when corruption within the New York City Police Department was as corrosive as acid. Detective Bermudez was always in search for a score, an illegal path to riches, and he found it, thanks to one of the Pierre Hotel robbers. But because of that sudden boon, Bermudez learned that one's most priceless assets were honor and integrity, and not material wealth. FBI agent Matt Hammer. Weighing in on the opposite end of the scale from George Bermudez's deceitful and dishonorable inclinations, Agent Hammer was a law enforcer who subscribed to the highest standards of morals and adhered to the FBI's strictest rules and regulations. But at times someone who is too honest, too ethical, and too conservative sacrifices productivity and results. Assistant District Attorney Doug Pope. Mr. Pope, an African-American, was reared in a ghetto by a single mother. Against all odds, he repelled the temptation to emulate the dominant forces of his neighborhood. Driven by irrepressible motivations, he climbed above the 1950s stereotypical expectations of his race and attained his goal, to be a prosecutor and invoke his people's civil rights and protect them from racial injustice. In the 1970s, though, to ADA Pope's dismay, combating racial injustice was no less a feat than fighting Goliath. And just when he felt totally defeated, he was given charge of the Pierre Hotel robbery investigation, a nationally famous case that if he could only nab the perpetrators, it would surely propel him to stardom, or so he wished. Lauren Baker. Since her adolescence, her dad had not bestowed her love and affection, and she sought a father figure. For that reason, she married a much older man who happened to be of means. But Lauren came with a generous trust fund and didn't need anyone's financial support. Though after her husband's passing, she being so young and vibrant, wealth alone could not allay her loneliness. And it is the desperate longing for companionship that often goads a man or a woman into an irreversible commitment to a mate who may not be suitable. Judge Andrew Tyler. The Honorable Judge Tyler, another African-American component of this story, wasn't so honorable. He had been the focus of a succession of improprieties, which led to disciplinary consequences. The consensus of the investigators who reviewed his string of infractions was that he had no reservations in tapping into the authority of his judgeship for self-serving gains. Moreover, His Honor had tendencies to disregard the importance of his responsibilities on the bench. Judge Tyler's professional derelictions, it could be said, were a scar on the judicial system. On the other hand, his indiscretions might have been to the advantage of the defendants who appeared before him. Chapter 1. Nick Sacco. I wasn't born a thief, but at 13 years of age I was already a pro. I was running with the big dogs, stealing rolls of cables from the phone company and selling the copper to scrap yards. I had to. My father skipped town and I was helping my mother make ends meet. I had a knack for getting in and out of tight spots as if I were double-jointed, even though I was quite tall for my age, eventually growing to 6'2". Because of my agility, my mother, may she rest in peace, nicknamed me the Cat. And it kind of fit nicely with the rest of my name, Nick the Cat Sacco. As I got older, I specialized in stealing jewels. I didn't get rich from this kind of work, but it was a living, and that let me afford to move my mother into a decent little house. In 1972, though, it all changed for me when I was pulled into the score of scores, the robbery that has never been topped. I was asked to work with the two slickest and smartest jewel thieves I've ever known, Bobby Comfort and Sammy the Arab, Nalo. But when these two guys first told me about the plan to break into the Pierre Hotel safe deposit boxes, I thought they had lost their senses. I was afraid we'd all get arrested and wind up in a federal joint for 30 years. The Pierre on 5th Avenue and 61st Street in Manhattan is one of the richest hotels in the world. It has hosted presidents, kings, and queens, literally. Some of the permanent residents there are princesses, wealthy socialites, celebrities, and reclusive moguls. Bobby Comfort and Sammy Nalo were so sure they'd figured out a way to break into the vault room, where hundreds of safe deposit boxes were encased in the walls. But I wasn't persuaded. They figured that on certain nights those damn boxes, all combined, might net us $20 to $30 million in jewels, bearer bonds, and cash. In today's value, that would equate to $250 million. I'm now paying attention with an open mind. Soon, Comfort and Nalo's scheme made sense. It was well thought out, and it had to do with taking over the entire hotel at 4 a.m. for 2.5 hours, holding hostage the night shift staff and anybody else who might have been awake. 2.5 hours. It sounded like something out of a movie. How can you take over a 40-story hotel with 400 guests without a hint that a bunch of armed robbers were smashing into deposit boxes in the vault room? Well, it wasn't easy or simple. Not to be caught, 1,000 things had to go right, and just one had to go wrong to get pinched. It's been 44 years since Comfort, Nalo, 5 other thieves, and myself, all armed, barged into the Pierre, hell-bent on cleaning out the deposit boxes. Of course, nothing goes as you want it to, and although we had rehearsed every step and thought we'd nailed it better than a stage dance, hair-raising incidents cropped left and right, and the unexpected took us by surprise. More unforgettably, many of the Pierre's guests, rich and influential, were eccentric, bizarre characters whose lives were as weird as a vegetarian wolf. When it was over, whatever happened became history, and I buried those memories deep in my mind, never thinking about the Pierre. But today, a gray, snowy afternoon, I was walking through Central Park, nearing 61st Street, and the peak of that famed hotel came into view above the trees, and the daring adventure of 1972 relighted in my head as if it was going on at that very moment. 1971. Bobby Comfort and Sammy the Arab Nalo, a black briefcase swinging at his side, were walking briskly on Canal Street in the Diamond District of Lower Manhattan, weaving through the crowded sidewalk of inattentive pedestrians. The air was fouled with the exhaust of diesel fuel from the caravan of delivery trucks inching through the narrow streets. "Let's first give it a go with Hyman," Comfort said. "He's pretty quick at making up his mind." Nalo side-glanced him and snickered. "Most of the times. Any way you look at it, he's a cheap old shyster." Comfort nodded his head. "We got another block to go, and there's his place. If we don't make a deal with Hyman, we'll go back to Delancey Street and see if we can do business with Abe Saperstein." Nalo sucked on his teeth and side-glanced Comfort. "Abe, another swindler." Comfort and Nalo strutted into H&M Jewelers, a long, narrow store, a glass showcase spreading the entire length of it. A dozen shoppers were hunched over the display cabinets, intently gazing at the jewelry. Hyman Bloom, the proprietor, saw Comfort and Nalo and fast-stepped to the end of the showcase where Nalo had placed his briefcase. Hyman, an Orthodox Jew, flashed a smile of brownish, crooked teeth. "It's nice to see you, boys." He put out his hand, fingers thin and bony, and Comfort shook it heartily. Hyman's curls, the payas, bouncing on the sides of his head, resembling two slinkies. "So how's business?" he asked in his Yiddish accent. Nalo swept his hand across the store. "Your business looks pretty damn good. Maybe you'll loosen up with your money." Hyman petted his pewter gray beard, the elderly man's cloudy eyes dimming. You should know. Nothing is the way it looks." He bent over the counter and whispered, "Aha, the overhead. It's a killer. A killer!" But he quickly perked up. "So tell me, what do you have for me today?" Nalo unclasped the briefcase and turned it to face Hyman. The scrawny gent, short and stoop-shouldered, peered through his thick bifocals, eyes twinkling and fleeting furtively. 20 feet down behind the glass counter, 3 or 4 salesmen with the yarmulkes and unruly black beards, oily curls of hair, the payas winding below the ears, were busy tending to the shoppers. Hyman nodded toward them. Let's move down a little. Know what I mean?" Hand-trembling, he took the loop that hung on his chest and wedged it under his right eyebrow. Hyman began inspecting the valued stones inside the briefcase one by one. The goods were a range of loose diamonds, rubies, opals, and emeralds. 15 minutes into his examination, the jeweler let the loop drop to his chest and looked upward at the taller Comfort. "Tell me, how much you boys want for all this?" Nalo, edgy and wiry, shifted from one foot to the other, and, beating his partner to the answer, he said with firmness, $650,000. Hyman grunted. "Follow me to my office. I have to take a closer look at what you have here. I don't know how many of these stones are numbered. As you boys know, whenever you shave off the numbers, you lose a half to a carat." "It don't matter, Hyman. 650 gives you plenty of wiggling room," Comfort countered. "First of all, most of the diamonds, as you see, are at least 8 carats and up. And look at the brilliance. We're talking about FVVS2 clarity rating. Also notice the shapes. Marquise, princess, emerald. And they're perfect cuts. These are top quality. You know that." The jeweler sing-sang, "Clarity, clackety, shapes, shapes, cuts, butts already. It all means nothing unless a customer steps up to the plate and shows the color of his money. And now the way the economy is, everybody squeezes the nickel into the bullshits." "I'll tell you right up front, we ain't taking less than 600, Nalo snipped. Comfort raised an open palm at his partner. "Take it easy, Sammy. We can work things out with our friend Hyman." Comfort, Nalo, and Hyman huddled in his office, a tiny space hardly spacious for 3 men. A small jeweler's scale, a primitive brass contraption mounted on a wooden case, stood amid a cluttered desk. Hyman slowly and deliberately, one by one, weighed the stones, jotting on a scrap pad the weight of each one. 20 more minutes of Hyman's assessment of the gems, and another 15 of handling with the sellers, funneled down to an agreed price of $567,000. The jeweler, bald and frail, dabbed his forehead with a napkin, saliva bubbling in the corners of his dry lips. "I need a couple of hours to get you boys the geld, okay?" Geld is a Yiddish term for money. "As long as the geld is in U.S. dollars," Nalo quipped, smirking, his deep black eyes that told of dark deeds skipping from Comfort to Hyman. "My geld is nothing but U.S. dollars. What do you think? I'm going to pay you with kosher chickens?" The transaction was consummated, and Comfort and Nalo took a deep breath. They had just liquidated the majority of the gems plucked when they had forayed into Sophia Loren's suite at the Hampshire House Hotel on Central Park South in New York City. 6 months ago, in October of 1970, Comfort and 2 gunmen had taken over the hotel lobby. Nalo, posing as a service technician, encroached into Ms. Loren's apartment, held the Italian actress at gunpoint, and stripped the distressed woman of her jewelry. He then cut the phone lines and ran off, without harming Ms. Loren and her 2-year-old son. Nalo fled by means of the stairway, rather than the elevator, vanishing in seconds. Hyman well understood the stones were swag. 50% of the jewelers in the Diamond District buy and sell hot products. This is an unknown commonality, but not to FBI agent Matt Hammer, who was the lead investigator of the Loren case and had been fast creeping at Comfort and Nalo's heels. Chapter 2. November 1971. Bobby Comfort, in his late 40s and looking tailored in a taupe three-quarter-length Burberry trench coat, was frittering away time in the exquisitely decorated lounge of a midtown Manhattan hotel. The lounge itself, Café Pierre, was sunken 3 feet lower than the lobby level, and the elaborate wrought iron scrolling of the 3-step brass hand railings were inspired by the Rococo style. 2 etched glass doors lent the café privacy and quietude. The 12 round tables there, topped with black granite, each accommodated 4 green leather upholstered club chairs. Comfort's brown eyes, roaming and inquisitive, were obscured by dark sunglasses, his face hidden behind a copy of the New York Times. The headlines read, "Nixon plans trip to New York first week of New Year." On prior travels to Manhattan, President Richard Nixon had lodged at the Pierre, and presumably he'd do the same on his next visit. This might pose a dilemma and interfere with Comfort's plot. On this evening at 11:40, the café's 26-foot bar, tastefully veneered with golden-colored brushed stainless steel, was sparse of people. At 20-minute intervals, Comfort had been ambling nonchalantly into the black-and-white checkered floor lobby, his gray tweed totes hat pulled snugly over his forehead. He had followed this practice on numerous nights, occasionally parking himself at the Café Pierre's softly lit bar, drinking Dewar's and soda. "Care for another?" asked the bartender, timely striking a match to light the cigarette Comfort had stuck between his lips. "Yes, but this time I'll have a shot of Bailey's." He leaned in closer to the bartender for him to light his pell-mell. "Thanks." Comfort drew on the cigarette and exhaled a puff, his eyelids squinting from the smoke. It was a rarity to see him not smoking. "By the way, what's your name?" "Dean. And yours?" "I'm George St. John. Pleased to meet you, Dean." Comfort's diction was polished and deliberate, and he chose his words to connote an educated background. Dean turned his back to fetch the Baileys from the liquor rack, and Comfort said, "Not many people here tonight. To the casual listener, this might have been idle talk, confabulation." "Not at all." Comfort was collecting intelligence. He tasted the Bailey's dense sweetness and surveyed the surroundings, sumptuousness everywhere. Dean, an engaging smile on his face and always apt with a witty phrase, pulled on his own cigarette. "This is not unusual. After 11 o'clock it quiets down. Sometimes I can fall asleep." He winked and added, "By the way, this late, when everything is nice and quiet, the right fish might walk in. Know what I mean?" Comfort returned the wink and downed his drink. "I sure do know what you mean." He bid Dean good night and perused the ground floor of the sleepy lobby. He was waiting to see at what time of night the hotel's bookkeeper shut the cast-iron door to the vault, where the guests' safe deposit boxes were. At 12:05 the vault's door was still open, but rather than mill about at this late hour, possibly looking suspicious, he thought it best to leave and adjourn his stakeout until the next evening. The following afternoon, a bone-chilling, rainy weather, Comfort, his long sideburns trimmed, face clean-shaven, tinting his complexion in a greenish shadow, paid another visit to the same hotel. In a black double-breasted suit, he walked with a purposeful gait to the registration desk, a black marbled ebony counter. A 6-foot, predominantly powder-blue painting hung behind it, flanked by 2 beige marble columns. Comfort, his Burberry raincoat draped over the left arm as he lugged along a Louis Vuitton garment bag, accosted the reception clerk. "Good day. I'd like a room for the night," he said, sternness and formality in his voice. The clerk's garnet uniform was custom-fitted, a beige handkerchief folded in the breast pocket, and he had the faintness of a British accent. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. Will it be just one night?" "Yes. My name is Dr. George St. John," Comfort said. His black hair combed to the side in a neat part, fingernails manicured, certainly befitting the image and comportment of a physician. Earlier that day, at Nalo's apartment in the Hell's Kitchen quarter of Manhattan, Comfort had applied heavy makeup to lessen 2 revolting scars on his face, one over the left eyebrow and the other to the right of his mouth. The clerk assigned room 2169, and Comfort gave him a credit card, an American Express. The card holder's name read Dr. George St. John, a bogus account. The clerk consulted the weekly bulletin of invalid and stolen credit cards, and indeed Dr. St. John's account was in good standing. The clerk laid the Amex onto the credit card hand printer, swiped it with the roller, and placed the receipt on the desktop for the customer to sign. "It's been a pleasure to be of service to you, Doctor. Please put your John Hancock here." Then, almost forgetting, he said, "Oh, Doctor, here's the key to your room." Comfort smiled politely and wandered to the elevators in the main hallway of the hotel. Before the advent of computers, credit card merchants received from banks a weekly bulletin of lost and fraudulent account numbers. The time that lapsed between the reporting of a card theft and the storekeeper's receipt of the advisory was 21 days. Inside that window, fraudsters could axe out a costly spending spree. The lift operator, a black man in a black uniform and a crop of white hair under his hat, sprung into a stance of attention. "What floor, sir?" 21st floor, please." The elevator thrust into a heart-fluttering ascent. When it slowed to a bumpy halt, Comfort disembarked and went to his suite. Comfort's purpose to lodge at this hotel was to track the daily practices of the management and the staff, and of greater importance to pinpoint the hour of night the bookkeeper locked the vault. Bobby Comfort settled into the room, the walls veneered with peach sand satin wallpaper, and undressed to shower and shampoo his wavy jet-black hair. Although a few hours earlier he had showered at Nalo's apartment, the stressful ordeal of assuming an alter ego, Dr. St. John, and passing a stolen American Express, a film of clamminess was seeping in his underarms. Tired, Comfort lumbered into the shower stall and lay under the hot, foggy water for 20 minutes. He dried off and napped until the early evening. Rested and perfumed, he dressed and centered the gray totes hat on his head, casting an aura of erudition. Comfort strode down to the lounge, and a different bartender welcomed him. Dean was off that evening. A woman, her legs crossed, had been sitting on one of the bar stools nursing a cocktail, rattling the ice in her tumbler. The bartender asked Comfort, "Can I get you something, sir?" Comfort scanned the bottles behind the bar. "Let's see. How about a Remy Cognac?" "Certainly, sir." "That's a good choice. Cognac warms my insides on a cold, lonely night," intruded the lady on the bar stool to his right, her voice low and smoky, as if she'd just wakened. Comfort stole a glance at her partly uncovered legs. "Yes, a dry cognac warms me all over as well." He put out his arm for a handshake. "I'm Professor T. Philip Pickens. Madam?" The brunette, appealing and sprightly, tilted her head as though she were in awe, and placed her hand in his. "I'm Glenda Atkins. Pleased to meet you, Professor Pickens." "Oh, please call me Philip. And will you join me for a drink?" To Comfort's fluster, she held on to his hand. "Sure, I'll have a Remy, too." And she moved over onto the stool beside his. He ordered for Glenda, and with an inquisitive look in her black olive-size eyes, she asked, "What do you teach, Philip?" "I'm an archaeologist." "An archaeologist? What are you doing in New York? I wouldn't have thought you'd find dinosaur bones in Manhattan." Comfort raised his index finger as if he were about to give a lesson. "Actually, after extensive research, my colleagues and I have formed a consensus, and—" "What's a consensus?" Comfort knew that word would stump Glenda, who was from Queens. Consensus means an accord, an agreement among a group. He rubbed his chin and cleared his throat. "Anyway, we have reasons to believe that fossils of behemoth prehistoric animals may lie beneath the 42nd Street subway station." He was having fun. Glenda didn't know the word behemoth either, but not to further lay bare her ignorance of the language, she tuned to a different frequency. "Interesting stuff. And you too, Philip. You're an interesting man." She brushed her hand on the lapel of his jacket. "Ah, I love your gray tweed blazer, and your yellow V-neck wool vest matches so well." She stared at him as if something had struck her nosiness, a smile opening to fairly nice rows of teeth. "Do you always wear sunglasses in the dark?" He touched and jiggled the frame of his glasses. "I'm sensitive to light." Comfort chortled to move the conversation along. "Are you here regularly?" "You can say that, Philip. I work in the hotel, and after I'm done I come into the lounge and have a drink. Or two." She works here. Perfect, Comfort thought. "What do you do here, Glenda?" She patted Comfort's wrist and pursed her succulent lips, as if in a moment of confusion. "Oh, you mean what kind of work I do?" Glenda recrossed her legs, revealing meaty thighs. "Well, I'm the assistant to the bookkeeper, who keeps track of the inventories inside the guests' safe deposit boxes." Comfort gulped. "This is getting better by the minute." What a wonderful coincidence. Nick Sacco. Whenever Bobby Comfort was on a mission, he was as smooth as silk. He could hoodwink a cop, an FBI agent, a judge, or a lady. He was loyal to his marriage and loved his wife, but if he got involved...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?